everyone. Welcome back to Arcane Station. I'm your host, Mike Porter. Tonight we're doing the final episode on North Carolina, and this time we're going to look into hauntings, poltergeists, and the paranormal. So I found that North Carolina is considered one of the most haunted states in the country. Now, the state obviously is nicknamed the first in fright, which is interesting. So I'm going to go through a few of these areas and some additional ones as I go through, and just talk about them really quickly. Now, once again, I am moving. As a matter of fact, I am sitting at my desk right now. I have to go teach a class or do a final, and then I come back home. I tear everything down after grading, and I'm going to get in the car, and then the very next day, very next morning, I'm going to be heading out to Virginia Beach, and be there for roughly a week, and then I'm going to head down to North Carolina where I start my new position. So I'm excited about getting started. I'm excited about getting going, but I wanted to make sure that I got this done so while I'm on the road, I don't have to worry about doing another episode, at least for that day, because I'll get there Friday in Virginia Beach, and then Saturday I've got work to do around the house and stuff. So I've been gone I've been gone 7 months. So from the house that we're renting. All right, here we go. So there's a circle of bare earth in the woods of Chatham County, and I've talked about this before in some other areas, but this area sits 10 miles outside of Siler City, and it's 40 feet across. It's perfectly round, and it's been there in that shape, barren and empty, since before the country was formally organized and before the Revolutionary War. Nothing grows in it, not grass, not weeds, not the pine needles that cover the entire rest of the forest floor. There's nothing on that ground. And local farmers have tried to seed it. Botanists have tested the soil. The first published scientific account of it appeared in 1882. No one has produced a satisfying explanation for why that circle exists, why it holds that shape, or what's happening to the ground underneath it. And people who camp there overnight claim that objects left inside the circle are gone by morning, moved to outside the perimeter. Dogs will not cross the boundary, and compasses have been reported to spin dramatically while inside of it. A journalist once spent the night inside the circle and documented the sound of footsteps moving around the tent in the dark, and she didn't find the source. So, as I said, North Carolina is one of the most haunted states in the country. There's a documented record of unexplained activity, investigated by scientists, reported by law enforcement, witnessed by ship crew and hospital staff, and Civil War reenactors. And that stretches back for centuries now. And, it's not an easy thing to figure out about what it is, right? What's going on. So I'm going to talk mainly about 6 locations, but there's a couple of other ones I'll throw in at the end here. So the first one is the most documented vanishing hitchhiker case in American folklore. So it's called Lydia's Bridge. It's in Jamestown. So it sits at the underpass of a railroad bridge over East Main Street in Jamestown in Guilford County between Greensboro and High Point. The haunting in its simplest form is a young woman in a white dress appears on rainy nights near the bridge. She flags down a passing car and asks for a ride home, gives an address, and then vanishes from the vehicle before it arrives at the house, sometimes leaving only a wet seat behind. Drivers who have gone to the address are told in most versions that woman had died years ago. So this legend's been in active circulation since approximately 1924. Folklorist Nancy Roberts documented it in her 1959 book, An Illustrated Guide to Ghosts and Mysterious Occurrences in the Old North State. And she interviewed multiple witnesses with no prior connection to each other. In 1956, the Greensboro Daily News ran an article documenting over a dozen separate accounts from motorists. One witness was a local minister, Reverend Joseph Thompson, who reported his encounter in 1964. He had picked up the woman. She had given him an address on the other side of Greensboro, and she was gone before he arrived. There are 11 documented regional variations of the Lydia story in North Carolina alone, which is an interesting data point. When a legend spawns that many local variants, that means that something is anchoring it to that geography, like maybe there's, or maybe there is some sort of spirit, trickster spirit that's just in a regional area. So paranormal researchers Michael Renegar and Amy Greer spent 30 years chasing the Lydia legend before they found something in the archive. In June 21st of 1920 edition of Greensboro Patriot, they reported a death of a young woman named Annie L. Jackson, killed when a car turned over on the wet road on High Point in Jamestown, directly beneath the old bridge on that site. 3 other occupants survived, but Annie didn't. Her death certificate records her arrival at the hospital at 10:30 p.m. on June 20th of 1920, and the cause of death was a fall from the automobile. She was 35 years old, and she worked at the sample room at Vicks Chemical Company. She was buried at Holt's Chapel on June 22nd. Her middle initial was L. Annie L. Jackson's great-grandniece, Robin Mitchell Taylor, has been researching her family genealogy for years after Renegar and Greer published their findings. When she put the pieces together, the bridge, the initials, the date, she recognized her great-aunt, the woman who her family never talked about, and she's buried at Holt's Chapel, dead at 35 on a wet road in Jamestown in 1920. Whether Annie Jackson is the source of the Lydia legend or a parallel, it's, hasn't been definitively settled. No one has produced a single witness account from before 1924 at that specific site. But the proximity, in location and time and initials is not nothing. There's something to this, and the story has been consistent for a century. The woman in white at the bridge is still reported. North Carolina placed a Legends and Lore historical marker at the site in 2024. Now the next one we're going to look at is From the Road to the Sea. The USS North Carolina, which is in the port in Wilmington, is it's moored. It's not on the ocean. It's moored on the Cape Fear River, which is pretty interesting that it's at Cape Fear. So the USS North Carolina was commissioned on April 9th, 1941, and it was a fast battleship. It was 729 feet long, and it was commissioned into the Atlantic Fleet 8 months before the United States entered World War II. After Pearl Harbor, she transferred to the Pacific, where she participated in every major naval offensive for the remainder of the war, earning 15 battle stars. She was the most decorated battleship in the conflict. She lost 10 men. Of those, 5 were killed in a single event. September 15th of 1942, during the Guadalcanal campaign, a Japanese torpedo struck the port side, detonating inside a lower deck washroom. 5 sailors were killed. 23 were wounded, and the ship remained operational after that happened. The North Carolina was decommissioned in June of 1947. Now, in 1961, a grassroots campaign, most of it funded by North Carolina school children who donated dimes and quarters, saved her from the scrapyard. She was towed to Wilmington and moored across the river from the downtown waterfront, where she has been a museum ever since. The paranormal activity centers on 3 areas. The first is the washroom where the torpedo detonated, and museum staff and all-access visitors who've entered that space report disembodied voices, cold spots, and the sound of alarms with no active source. The washroom is not part of the standard daytime tour. The second is a passageway on the lower decks. A figure, young, male, blonde hair, has been seen by multiple independent witnesses moving through the corridors, including in sections sealed off to the public. He has been described as wearing a U.S. Navy uniform and moving purposefully as if on duty. When approached, he disappears. The third is the engine room, where investigators have reported persistent electromagnetic field anomalies and thermal imaging irregularities on separate occasions. The most sustained account comes from Danny Bradshaw, who served as the ship's night security guard for more than 30 years. So Bradshaw has given multiple on-record interviews about his experiences. He reports two distinct presences. One he describes as neutral or even helpful, the blonde-haired sailor, who appears to interact with the ship's electrical systems, turning lights on and off. And the second he describes as cold and aggressive, and associated with drops in temperature, physical touch, and on one occasion a sound he described as someone yelling directly at him from an empty room. Bradshaw is not a person looking for attention. He worked overnight shifts alone on a decommissioned battleship for 3 decades. And he didn't quit. He just said at one point when the activity started, he got scared. Then he got mad, and that's when it stopped for the night. The USS North Carolina now offers sanctioned ghost hunts and overnight paranormal investigations aboard the vessel. Investigators consistently report EMF spikes in the torpedo impact zone. Now, whether that's a residual electromagnetic interference from aging electrical systems or something else, no one has established that scientifically, obviously. Pardon me. All right, so the next one is Broughton Hospital in Morgantown. And I hope I'm saying that correctly. Broughton Hospital in Morgantown opened in March 29th of 1883 under the name Western North Carolina Insane Asylum. It was built according to the Kirkbride Plan, a 19th century psychiatric philosophy developed by Dr. Thomas Kirkbride, which held that the architecture of an asylum could itself be therapeutic. Long wings radiating from central administration buildings, natural light, symmetry. The idea was that order and beauty were part of the treatment, which I think is a fantastic idea. And the other thing is I think we've lost beautiful buildings and beautiful accents in buildings, and it's sad that all of that traditional artwork is no longer visible in buildings anymore, usually. So in practice, Broughton became what most asylums of that era became. By the 1920s, the patient-to-physician ratio was 300 to 1. Good Lord. By the 1930s, it was 500 to 1. Treatments included hydrotherapy, electroconvulsive therapy, and lobotomies. And lobotomies were pretty rampant and prevalent in all of the different institutions at that time period. So the hospital was renamed State Hospital at Morgantown in 1890. Dr. Patrick Livingston Murphy, the first superintendent, pushing to remove the word insane from the name to reduce stigma. It became Broughton Hospital in 1959, named after Governor J. Melvin Broughton. On its grounds sits a cemetery where patients who were wards of the state were buried, many with numbered markers rather than names. The documented events are substantial. In April 22nd of 1971, Dr. Paul Boyles, age 37, was found dead inside a locked room along with Betty Creek Yarborough, a 39-year-old nurse administrator. The official conclusion was murder-suicide. Staff at the hospital in the years since have reported hearing heated voices in the administrative wing where this occurred. Argument-like in character and coming from empty rooms. Shadowed figures resembling a man in a lab coat and a woman in nursing uniform have been reported in that section. There's the case of the Eller twins, two sisters who were patients at Broughton and died approximately 1 hour apart inside the facility. The details of their deaths are recorded in the hospital's historical records. Their simultaneous deaths within the same walls have been a source of persistent claims of doubled apparitions, two identical figures seen moving through one of the residential wings. The elevator in one of the older buildings has a documented reputation among staff. Reports span multiple decades. The elevator operating on its own, stopping on floors without a call, doors opening to empty hallways. Staff working late shifts are the most consistent source of this report. The hospital is still operational to this day, which means that no outside paranormal investigators have been permitted to formally investigate, which also means the claims come exclusively from people who work or have worked there. And that's a very interesting and different sort of report than somebody on a ghost tour, perhaps seeing something or feeling something. So former employees have also described a patient who in recent decades found access to a stairwell in one of the buildings near North Carolina Highway 18 and died there. Since then, staff on the late shifts have reported sounds from that stairwell, movement, occasionally a voice, when the building is otherwise empty, or at least that section is otherwise empty. Broughton is still treating patients today, and it serves approximately 4,000 people from 37 countries in western North Carolina. The older wings, the Kirkbride-era buildings, sit alongside the functioning facility, and the National Register of Historic Places listed the original structures in 1977. So the history and the current operation share the same grounds. It tends not to come up in the same, conversations, but it is one of the most prominent paranormal sites in North Carolina, but it's based on the volume and consistency of staff reporting. Not, like I said, not tour guides giving people information. So at the top, I talked about this circle in Harper's Crossroads in Chatham County. That's called the Devil's Tramping Ground. And the circle's been there longer than the documentation of it. So in the oral tradition of pre-colonial Cherokee, they described a place matching that description, and they attributed it to a battle between the Cherokee and the Catawba around AD 1200, in which so much blood soaked into the ground that nothing would ever grow there again. The losing tribe, in that account, abandoned the mainland entirely. A different Cherokee tradition says that the lights sometimes seen near the circle are the spirits of the warriors from that battle. So like I said, the first written account of the Devil's Tramping Ground appears in 1882. There is an official website called NCpedia, and it's the official sort of like Wikipedia of North Carolina. And it describes the site in this way: a foot-wide bare path forming a perfect circle, 40 feet in diameter. Normal vegetation surrounds the circle. Only a wiry grass grows inside. No plant life of any kind can be found on the path itself. Scientists have tested the soil for acidity, salt content, and toxicity. No explanation has ever been found for why the ground remains sterile while the surrounding forest is healthy. Locals have attempted to transplant the wiry grass that grows inside the circle to the other soil, and it doesn't survive. Like if you take it out of that circle and place it in a nice area, it just doesn't survive. The object displacement claim is the most persistent behavioral thing. So basically, if you leave items within the boundary of the circle before nightfall, they're found outside of the circle in the morning. And this has been reported by visitors for well over a century. I don't know if it seems to me like what you need to do then is put stuff inside the circle and place a camera over it and see what happens and why it displaces. Maybe I get to do that at some point when I get there. But like I said, this has been documented for well over a century, and animals, in particular dogs, consistently exhibit avoidance behavior at the perimeter of this circle. Whether this means anything or is a learned response from human anxiety at this site is worth, looking into, trying to see if you go in the circle with the dog, if they would come into the circle with you. I'm not sure. There's also compass anomalies that are reported, but they're inconsistently documented. And again, I think this is a perfect example of using new technology or existing technology to sort of like capture this information. So the problem is that researchers have been unable to identify the specific cause of this particular circle. Like there are things called fairy rings, which is basically a fungus, it's like the mycelium suppressing growth in a near perfect ring. That happens in nature. So, but this one in particular, I don't think they're finding the mycelium, which causes the fairy ring. So, and again, there's this salt hypothesis that if you salt the earth, it will not grow anymore. But you would have residue of that salt, and they're not finding that. And then there's also this hypothesis of a fire circle. But, typically when you have a fire in nature, what it does is it burns down all the vegetation and organic matter, and then that becomes the nutrients that feed the next bit of plant life that's coming from it. And typically the forest comes back stronger after a forest fire than it does. It doesn't create these barren landscapes. It actually helps support growth. So I find that really interesting that they even thought that fire would be something that did that. It could be a chemical thing, which I don't know. Again, they're not finding samples that have those pieces of information in them. All right, the next section is Fort Fisher. It's in Cure Beach. Or Cure Beach, I'm not sure which. So this is south, right? It's on the Cape Fear Peninsula, and it's about 20 miles south of Wilmington, and that's, again, Fort Fisher. Fort Fisher was the largest earthwork fortification in the Confederacy. It guarded the mouth of the Cape Fear River, and that was the last open supply line available to Confederate forces in the final year of the Civil War. As long as Fort Fisher held, blockade runners could reach Wilmington and resupply, specifically Lee's army in Virginia. Obviously, this would fall, and that would effectively close the Confederacy's last major port. The first battle of Fort Fisher in December of 1864 was a Union failure. The second, fought January 13th through the 15th in 1865, was the largest combined land and sea assault in American history until the World War II invasions at Normandy. And more than 60 Union warships bombarded the fort while over 8,000 troops stormed it on foot. And the Confederates held for 6 hours, and then it fell. The Confederate commander was General William Henry Chase Whitling. He was mortally wounded in the battle and was captured and transported to the Governor's Island in New York Harbor, where he died March 10th, 1865, 2 weeks before the end of the war. He never saw the Confederates surrender. So Whitting's ghost has been reported at the fort since the early 20th century. A gray uniformed figure standing on the old parapet at dusk, looking back toward the road. This is consistent across multiple independent accounts from park visitors and staff for more than a century. The second entity is more anomalous, known as the Sentinel or the Watcher in the woods. It appears in a pine grove north of the fort itself. The first recorded sighting was in the early 1900s. Park employees, tourists, and paranormal investigators have all reported it. It's described as a uniformed figure standing at attention, not moving, not approaching, just standing and watching. In an investigation by the group Haunted North Carolina, 3 separate team members saw the figure in the woods simultaneously. A temperature reading taken at the location dropped from 68 degrees Fahrenheit to 43 degrees. The recording equipment logged footsteps in the wood at the same moment a motion detector showed no movement at all. Flashlight batteries drained faster than normal, and the Sentinel doesn't approach. It just stood there, and then when they tried to approach, it vanished. A 2004 investigation by the Cape Fear Paranormal Investigation Team captured a photograph containing what appeared to be a human-shaped figure in a location where no person was present. The image was reviewed by Jeff Bellinger and included in the 2005 Encyclopedia of Haunted Places. Additional reports from the site include wet footprints on the wooden walkways, prints that transition from one account from bare feet over the course of a few steps to boots. So it went from bare feet, wet feet, and then it transformed into boots as it was stepping. The sounds of combat comes from the ocean at night. These latter reports are hardest to evaluate and may reflect acoustic phenomena from the ocean and wind off the peninsula, and not necessarily the sounds of combat, boats shooting cannons and things like that. That it's possible that it's probably not, a residual sound. It's probably something from the ocean itself, but it sounds like it. So Fort Fisher is a state historic site. It's free to visit, and the battlefield and the earthwork mounds still remain. It's the bloodiest land-sea engagement in American history before World War II, and it happened right there on the grounds, and that is probably why there's some sort of haunting associated with it. Now, in the first or second episode, I can't remember which, I think it was the second, I did talk about the Brown Mountain Lights. So basically the Appalachian Mountain Range is famous for the Brown Mountain Lights, and these are just mysterious glowing orbs that have been witnessed dancing above the peaks since the 1200s, and they still continue to this day. There's also, in Asheville, the Biltmore Estate. So George and Edith Vanderbilt's sprawling mansion is said to be haunted by the couple, and there's apparitions of the Vanderbilts have been spotted in the library, and the visitors report unexplained splashes and hear voices near the estate's indoor pool. So there you go. We have, I think it's 7 now locations. You have a hitchhiker with a provable real-world identity. A battleship with a security guard who spent 30 years as the most consistent paranormal witness in the state. A psychiatric hospital still in operation where the staff are the ones that were reporting things. A circle of earth that no one can explain that has maintained its shape for a century and a half of observation. A Civil War fort where 3 investigators saw the same figure at the same moment, and a thermometer dropped 25 degrees. And a Gilded Age mansion where the most persistent reports are from the maintenance staff and overnight employees who were not there to look for ghosts. All right, so North Carolina has the ocean, the Appalachian Mountains, the Piedmont Flat Grounds, and several hundred years of documented history covering colonialism, Revolutionary War, Civil War, industrial expansion, and 2 world wars. Lots happened here. A lot of people died there. Whether you think that creates conditions for paranormal activity or simply creates the cultural soil for which the paranormal stories grow, the record's dense enough that dismissing it as a whole requires ignoring a significant amount of independent, consistent testimony over long periods of time. I'm not going to tell you what to make of any of it, and that's not how I do this show. I just tell you that I think what they see is real, and reality is very strange. So if you're driving down Highway 70 between Greensboro and Jamestown on a rainy night, maybe slow down at the bridge and see if you can meet that young woman and give her a ride home. Maybe this time you'll be able to, deliver her where she needs to go. All right. So if you've enjoyed the show, please send that out to a friend, like, subscribe, let me know what I'm doing right, let me know what I'm doing wrong. I'm happy to adjust this to make sure that people are enjoying the show. All right. Until next time, which I think I'm going to look into. Let me look into my notes here. I think the next time I'm going to look at working on the Paris catacombs because I think they're super fascinating. All right, have a wonderful evening.